Hey, welcome back to Growth Groups. A few quick announcements for you about our schedule for the remainder of the school year. We only have 3 nights of actual growth groups remaining tonight, and then next week we are off because of April vacation. And then we got 2 weeks of growth groups on Sunday nights. And then on May 16th, we are going to be celebrating our graduates. So even if you are not a grad, I don't want you to think, oh, well, that's for them, not for me. That's for our whole group, that we are one. And so whether or not you're in sixth grade or if you're a senior, we are equal parts of SSBC Youth Ministry. So you matter wherever you are in that grade spectrum. And so we want to celebrate our graduates so that they head off to whatever is next for them with love and with celebration from our whole group. So make sure you come out for that on May 16th. Graduates, I've tried contacting you guys and your parents about getting some pictures and with just a basic information form about kind of just what your plans are and to see if you're going to be able to attend. So just look for that email in your inbox. And if you didn't get it, hit me up. You know how to get me. Okay? Tonight's joke of the week is from a student, and this is the joke. And Jesus said to John, "Come forth, and you will receive eternal life." Unfortunately, John came fifth and won a toaster instead. How was it? All right. All right. So, all right. There we go. All right. Tonight in growth groups, we are looking at John 19. A few weeks ago, we just celebrated Easter and Good Friday and all those things. Tonight is John 19, where it talks about Jesus' crucifixion and where Jesus dies. And so often in life, we think about suffering, right? We think about suffering from a Christian perspective as like, oh, well, God can heal my suffering and then God will be glorified by my healing, right? And this is how we think about things sometimes. But that's not really the way of the cross. Like when we look at John 19, when we look at the way that Jesus talked about predicting his death that was coming up throughout the entire Gospel of John, when we think about the way that Jesus talks about suffering, it's not just that God sees suffering as a way for God to display his power, but as God's actual plan for how he saves us. And so Jesus could have come with power and with chariots and with angels all the time following him around, making everyone love him and worship him the way that he was worthy. Instead, Jesus came in weakness, right? Jesus came and he suffered and he died a really painful and humiliating death. I mean, when you read the passage tonight, really think about the humiliation that Jesus endured for you, for me, and that the way of the cross called Christ to live, to die, to suffer, and by his suffering, he secured our salvation. That Jesus was our substitute on the cross, taking the shame, the mockery, the humiliation that he did not deserve, but we did. And he took that on himself as our substitute so that we could receive God's favor, so that we could receive adoption as God's children, who God sees as holy and sinless and righteous, not because of what we've done, but because of what Christ has done. And so we see this reversal of what we deserve, Christ's received, and what we receive is what Christ was worthy of. And so as you read through John 19 and consider Jesus' walk and journey towards the cross, thinking about just kind of the way that you would have written the gospel if it was up to you to make it up, right? That I don't think any of us would have decided on our own, like, oh, if I'm going to write God's salvation plan, it's going to involve the suffering of God and it's going to involve God dying on the cross. It would probably be some like amazing story about victory rather than the cross. And yet, this was God's plan, right? So that we have this exchange of what we deserve and what Jesus received, and what we receive even though we weren't worthy, and what Jesus deserved. And so we see this kind of trade off. And so I want you to think about the cross. I want you to think about this trade off, and how that's covered by grace, right? That grace is receiving what you don't deserve. And that's what we receive through the cross, right? That we receive the righteousness of God, not because we deserved it, but because God is gracious, because God is merciful, because God is love. And so we see God's grace, God's mercy, God's love displayed here in John 19 through Jesus' walk and journey towards the cross. And we're going to continue finishing out John 20 and John 21, right? The resurrection, the Easter story, and then what happens after Easter as we wrap up in our growth groups this year. So have a great night, and I hope that you had a great Easter last week, and I hope that you have a really great conversation about the cross in your groups tonight.